Hello, everybody. Today we're talking about one of my favorite genres, contemporary romance. Simply put, contemporary novels are set in modern times, and romance novels follow the romantic relationship of two or more people, ending with a happily ever after or a happy for now. It's an extremely popular genre, easily one of the most popular in fiction, and a lot of you have been asking, how the hell do I write it well? I'm here to tackle the topic, and I decided to bring in the big dogs for this task. Today, I'm interviewing USA Today bestselling contemporary romance author Sariah Wilson. Sariah, thank you so much for joining me. It is an absolute honor.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love being here. This is fun.
Like I said, Sariah is a best-selling author. She specializes in flirtatious and fun contemporary romance, and she actually wrote one of my favorite reads of the year, Cinder-Nanny. If you haven't read it yet, you absolutely should. Sariah is here to answer your questions about writing contemporary romance, so if bringing the heart flutters is your thing, definitely stick around. We've got you covered. Before we get started, I have a couple of announcements. Next week, I'm having a live stream with some very special writerly guests. So if you want to ask questions live, play games, and have a great time, definitely set a reminder and stop by. We would love to have you. Additionally, I've got a big sale going down in my merch store. In honor of the upcoming Shut Up and Write the Book pre-sale, all merch is on sale for 15% off using code SHUTUP15. I've got a link listed below. Pick up t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, mugs, stickers, whatever. It's all on sale. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I post new videos on Wednesdays, and if you want to be alerted as soon as I upload, ring that bell. If dark fantasy romance is your vibe, The Savior's Champion and The Savior's Sister are available in ebook, paperback, hardback, and audiobook. They're available at all major retailers. I have them linked below. Now I am super excited to get down to business with my extra special guest, USA Today bestselling author Sariah Wilson. Sariah, thank you so much for stopping by. Are you ready for some questions?
I am ready. Bring them on.
Awesome. Let's start with the easy stuff. Number one, can you tell us about yourself and your work?
Yeah, I write a sweet contemporary romance, more romantic comedy, I think. I'm leaning more towards that direction. And I just like writing, I call them fun, flirty, feel-good stories, just things that are fun. They'll make you feel good after. There's not a lot of angst. And if there's some angst, it will go away and it will all end up happily ever after. So just something to kind of ease your burdens for a little bit.
That's what I like to hear, and that's what I like to read. Sometimes you just need something that makes you feel good, and you know that by the end, you're going to be feeling happy and not miserable.
Yes.
So the second question, how did you get into writing? Specifically, how did you get into writing contemporary romance or romantic comedies?
Oh, this is going to be a long answer, so I'll try to make it short. Just basically, I had a son who was diagnosed as being autistic just before his third birthday, and we were young. I was pregnant, and this was 20 years ago, so there wasn't the kind of support and therapies they have now. And they're like, you need this kind of therapy, and it's going to be $10,000. And insurance is like, we don't cover that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I come up with this money? Like it might as well have been 10 million for us. So I thought about it, kind of prayed about it, put it out there. And the answer I felt like I got was write a book. I'm like, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. And just kind of dismissed it. Like I'd always loved reading, but I'm not someone who grew up and thought I would be a writer. Like it wasn't really a dream of mine. And one of the things we did, like I said, this is before GoFundMe or that kind of stuff. A bunch of my neighbors got together and did like a multi-family garage sale. And so I sent out press releases hoping to get some press coverage and people out. And this reporter comes to my house to interview me. And I open the door and she's like, before I come inside, I have to ask you, are you a writer? And it was just like this really bizarre moment, right? And I'm like, why would you ask me that? And she's like, because your press release was so well written, I just assumed that you were a writer. And it was kind of like the heavens parting, the lightning bolt, the light bulb goes on over your head. And I'm like, oh, got it. Okay, I'm going to write a book. So I actually started off writing some historical romances for a very small niche publisher, and that was not a good experience. And that's kind of always where my interest had been, was with historical stuff. I had two more children, just got all my time sucked up. And the problem I have with the industry was it's kind of like you have to have an agent to get published, but you have to be published to get an agent. And then the indie revolution happened, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's all I wanted to talk about. You have to have these, to get published, you have to have these major ideas. It's this Jurassic Park level, thing to get your foot in the door. And I felt like I didn't have that. So with the indie stuff coming out, I'm like, I had this idea for young adult that was like contemporary romance, and it was fun. And so I had readers who read my historical stuff, and I can't tell you how many people read that book and they're like, this is what you should be doing. Like, this is your voice. This is amazing. Like, it's so much better than the stuff you used to write. And I really enjoyed it. And I'm like, but I'm like, and I love YA. I may go back to it someday, but I thought I love the idea that they can still get married at the end, and they can, that they can really be together. Because in a YA, no one's expecting that, right? Like, you're not going to end up with the guy that you to prom with. So, I mean, that can happen. For me, I'm like kind of analyzing, and I think every author should do this. Like, if you want to be a writer and you want to put out a book, I think you should do this. What do you love in books? What is the thing that sparks you? What is the thing that, so you're like, this is amazing and I love this and this is what I want to see? So for me, what I was finding is, of course, it has to be a romance, like happily ever after. It's just can't even discuss that. I thought, and I really respond to humor. Like, I love humor. And I'm like, you make me laugh out loud. Like, I'm a fan for life, because that's pretty unusual for me. And then writing sweet romance like I do, I felt like I was reading a lot of stuff where like they're holding hands on the last page, and I'm like, but wait, no, you can still have the chemistry and the falling for someone and being attracted to them and still have that kind of more spicy interaction, even if it's not leading to something else. So that was for me, when I sat down and I'm like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to write books, because this is the stuff that appeals to me. So that's kind of how I started writing contemporary romantic comedy.
I love that it all came from like so many signs that were like, this is what you should do. And you're like, no, I don't want to do it. And then finally, okay,
I got
universe.
it. I'll do it. Yeah.
You're like, I heard the signs. I got to do it. And there are so many other things that you said that I want to dive into, but I'm like, I have to pace myself because they pertain to other questions. So
okay.
holding it in. So my next question, when crafting a romance novel, what's your starting point? Do you start with a trope and build from there? Do you have the characters first? Or is it something else?
For me, it's the conflict. Because I write sweet, that I have to put an extra layer of conflict to keep them physically apart. Because, if you're in a lot of contemporary romances, like they're falling into bed in the first chapter, right? Like, you're hot, I'm hot, we're attracted. And then you find out he's your enemy or whatever, and they build from there. I have to keep that off the stage. And so for me, it becomes, what's the conflict in this book? What's going to be the thing that keeps them apart? And that's honestly what kind of comes first. I mean, even if I have like an idea, like I pull a lot of stuff, like with cinder-nanny, that was an actual event thing that went around like on Facebook, and this family was advertising for a nanny in Aspen. I mean, it was like $100,000 for 6 months, but it was like the most insane list you've ever seen in your whole life of the skills that you had to have. Like, you had to have this master's degree, you had to be fluent in French, you had to, all this stuff that I thought, who on the planet would meet all these requirements? And so then I'm like, what's the conflict here? What would make this thing interesting to me? And I'm like, what if she's lying? What if she can't do it? What if, you can't have a liar as a heroine without, making it okay for your reader? Well, she has a sick sister, and that's why she's doing it. It's for someone else. And what's the conflict here? Oh, well, she meets someone and she can't let her identity be revealed. And so that's kind of where I start from, and it branches out from there.
That's also for me a similar starting point. I have like a concept, and then I'm like, okay, how can I turn this into a conflict? And I love the fact that you're thinking not only in terms of the conflict, but balancing the flaws with the integrity in the characters, because you mentioned she's a liar, but she's lying for a good cause. And those kind of things are important. And I think a lot of writers, especially, newbie writers, kind of struggle with that. Building off of what you just said, one of the things I loved about cinder-nanny was that it had legitimate stakes. But this is something a lot of contemporary writers struggle with. The stakes are either way too low or unbelievably high. How do you recommend navigating this balancing act?
I think in romantic comedy, it's even harder, more of a challenge, because you want to have these things that are happening, that are driving the story, but you don't want it to overwhelm it, because if you have something that's really hard and difficult, it overshadows the story. And I'm trying to make it romantic and funny. Like, I personally don't read romantic suspense. And that's one of the reasons why I'm like, how are you falling in love when the serial killer is trying to slay you both? Right? Like,
right.
I mean, I get how it can happen, but I'm like, for me, that would be suspending so much disbelief that I'm not sure I could do it. But yeah, I don't actually know how you find that line. I just know it's important. And that's one of the reasons I think other readers, beta readers, or editors are really important, because they can be like, wow, this is super heavy handed. And I will tell you, I had a book, The Paid Bridesmaid, and one of the characters in there is an alcoholic. Her alcoholism is ruining the wedding. And I can't tell you how many people said, you need to pull this back. Like, you are going too far. Your jokes are too far. You're being too mean about this. And I'm like, well, in my family, alcoholism ruined my mother and father's lives. Like, they had abusive alcoholic fathers. And I'm like, I don't have a very good view of alcoholism, like that's just personal. But, this is what people were saying. And it wasn't just one person, it was multiple editors saying, hey, pull this back a little bit. And I
Right.
did. And I thought,
Mhm.
and it made it stronger. But so I think sometimes getting outside eyes because you can't see it yourself. And then I don't know, I think you can have stories where the stakes aren't too high, that there's such a genre for that there's so many people who are looking for, I really want this just very sweet and nothing bad happens to the people. And that's totally awesome too. Like go for that. But yeah, I think it's finding what you want to do in your work and what you're trying to say and kind of, the things you're trying to put across. And if you don't know, get somebody else to look at it.
I could not agree more. I'm constantly saying on my channel, get beta readers, get critique partners, get editors, because you're so close to the story,
Yeah.
and you mentioned the whole, the alcoholism being a little too heavy for a romantic comedy. I cover chronic pain in my book series, and I had people saying, whoa, that was really heavy. And to me, it's not, because my partner has chronic pain, so I'm used to it every single day. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I need to dial it back a bit.
Yeah.
So you brushed on this a little bit earlier, but let's talk about steam. Some romance novels are super spicy, others are squeaky clean, and a lot of them are somewhere in the middle. How do you recommend writers find their place on the spectrum?
I think you have to go back to what are you comfortable with, and what do you enjoy? If you're someone who's like, yes, give me all the spicy goodness in a romance novel, well, that's probably what you should be writing. And for myself, I often skip those pages, right? Like, it's just like, this doesn't really interest me. Okay, this happened. All right, they had sex. All right, let's go on. So for me, I kind of knew that's not where my strengths were, and that's not where I wanted to write. And so I just think you have to go back and look at the stuff that's appealing to you. Because I think when you try to write to market, when you're like, oh, spicy is in, that's what I need to write, and it's not your forte, like, I guess you can learn and get better at it. But I almost feel like there's this thing where readers can kind of tell, they can
Yep.
tell you're uncomfortable. They can tell this is hard for you. They can tell that this is not what you really want to be doing. So yeah, I think you just have to find for yourself and make your own line. I mean, I'm in a very weird spot with writing that I get people who are like, this is a book for teenagers because nothing happens between anyone. And then I get people who are like, oh my gosh, the smut in this book is so bad. And I'm like, so I'm in this really weird middle spot, where it's like I'm kind of making people mad on both sides of the spectrum. But for me, this is where I feel comfortable. This is my line. And as an author, like if you have the same line you're reading, awesome. Come read my books. And if you feel like this isn't enough, there's a whole market and good reading to you. And if you feel like it's too much, again, find an author where they're holding up hands on the last page, right? So
Right.
it's just it's finding what you're comfortable with and knowing that the readers will come and that they will follow you with what you're doing.
I could not disagree more with the dichotomy of the people's reactions, because for me, I enjoy some spice, but for me, what's most important is the chemistry between the characters. And so long as they have good chemistry and we get some payoff, like a very passionate kiss, then I'm happy. I do like some spice, but if the choice was chemistry or spice, I need the chemistry. If we get a whole lot of having sex and I feel like, but they don't even know each other, or
Yeah.
like, but they never bonded or anything, like it won't do anything for me. It's just kind of like, okay, well, this is happening, So for me, the chemistry is what's most important. That's one of the reasons why I really love Cinder-Nanny. I will talk about that a little bit later, but the chemistry
Okay.
was so on point. Also, I love that you mentioned, if you're not into it, readers are going to be able to tell. One of the questions I get a lot from my audience is, I want to write romance, but I don't really want to write a sex scene. I'm like, then don't write a
Yeah.
sex scene. It's not a requirement, you don't have to
Problem
do it.
solved. And if
Good
you
enough.
love smut, good for you. Like it's out there for you. You can get whatever you want. So
Exactly. There's a whole spectrum,
right.
have fun with it.
That's right.
So a few aspiring romance authors have told me they're concerned their story won't be interesting because everyone knows the characters will eventually live happily ever after. What are your tips for making the story unique and engaging, despite everyone knowing how it will end?
Yeah, I do get reviews like that. Like, I could tell from page one how this was going to end. And I'm like, well, I would hope so, because that's the entire point of the genre is that
Right.
how it's going to end. That's why you read it, because you're going to walk away from this book feeling happy and satisfied, right? So it almost feels like a weird thing to me because, like with a murder mystery, nobody in that genre is going, I just don't know how to make it interesting if they solve the murder at the end. Like that's going to happen, or how the bad guy's going to be caught in the end. That's so predictable in, a suspense thriller. No, it's what's going to happen. It's what the genre dictates, right? So I think to make it interesting is conflict, right? That's the most important thing. you have to have these two characters who are in conflict with each other, both internally and externally, that they have their own baggage and hangups that make it so they can't be together. And then there's bigger forces at play that's also kind of keeping them apart. And you keep, like the book I just wrote, one of the things I did that I enjoyed is I made a conflict that you're like, oh no, this is going to be the conflict. This is what's going to tear them apart. And then two chapters later, I knocked it down.
Oh,
And I'm
I
like,
love that.
this is resolved now. But here's the new conflict,
Mhm.
And so I just kept piling it on like that. Like I guess I'm trying to mess up the readers a little bit because like, oh, she's lied to him. This is what's going to happen. He's going to find out. It's going to blow up. So I kind of thought it'd be fun for me to write a book where the conflict keeps resolving, but then so you don't actually know what is going to be the bad thing that happens at the end. So that was kind of fun. But I think that building that conflict, and even if it's predictable, finding a way that you can mess with it. Like I had a book that I wrote, my first like professional book was called Royal Date. And in that one, the heroine has decided to wait for marriage, and she meets the prince of this nation. And of course, over the course of several weeks, they fall in love. And a paparazzi approaches her and wants her to give inside information. And so I led the reader to believe this is going to be the bad moment, right? This is going to be the thing that tears them apart. And he finds out his younger sister steals her phone and takes pictures. So he thinks the heroine's taking the pictures, and she's like, I didn't do this. And he's like, well, I believe you, and people are like, wait, what? And the conflict ended up being that she was ready to sleep with him before she went back to America. And he's the one who says no. Like,
Mhm.
I know this is important to you, and I don't want to be the reason that you betray this promise that you've made to yourself for this reason. And that was the big conflict. And she's like embarrassed and she's mad at herself. And that ends up being kind of what drives the wedge between them. So nobody was expecting that because I was building that story, the whole story. It's there if you're looking for it. But I put this other conflict on top of it that you're like, oh, this is the thing. So I don't know. I think it's like when you're driving across country, do you go past the Grand Canyon or do you drive through the flats of Nebraska, right? It's the scenery, it's the things that are happening around you. You know what the destination is going to be. You're going to end up in the same place, but it's how you are addressing it and building it around the reader that makes it interesting. And I conflict is the number one thing. And of course, everybody wants this sweet story where nothing bad happens, but you can't do that. You have to have these conflicts in there, and that's what's going to make your story interesting.
Honestly, this whole worry of how do I make it interesting when they know how it's going to end, for me it's like that's the entire reason people read romance, is they
Yep.
know they're going to finish the book satisfied with a happy ending. So worrying about that being a negative, it's only a negative to people who have no idea what the romance genre is and they pick up the book on accident. And in those cases it's like, you're not my audience, you're not my target, that's your problem, not mine.
Yeah.
But the entire reason people pick up the romance genre is, okay, I'm going to feel good at the end. And there's nothing worse than picking up a romance book and then you find out, oh, just kidding, it's a tragedy or something. And then you get to the end and you're like, this was not what I promised. That has happened to
Well,
me and it's awful. It's the worst.
Well,
So
and so many writers out there, I think, are trying to get romance money and are like, well, I'm going to change the genre. I'm going to write a romance where they don't end up together. And I'm like, then it's not a romance, right?
right,
Uh,
exactly.
it's the most important part. And I think if you're writing characters that people relate to and root for, like for me, watching a romantic comedy movie, like they're not doing them very good these days, right? Like there's very few romantic comedy movies that are actually kind of worth watching, but they do still happen. But for me, my litmus test is I'm not looking for Shakespeare. I'm not looking for art. I am looking for, did I want these idiots to kiss? And if the answer is
Exactly.
yes, then it was a good movie. If I'm rooting for these characters, so in addition to conflict, if you're creating characters that are rootable, that your reader's like, I'm invested, and obviously not every reader's going to be invested. There's going to be lots of people who are turned off by your characters who like, I don't like this thing they did, or I don't like how they think. That's totally fine. But you writing a character that is rootable, that is relatable, that your reader's like, I want you to kiss this idiot by the end of the book, then you've done your job.
Exactly, exactly. I could not agree more. So going back to your wonderful characters, one of the things I loved about cinder-nanny were the characters. Diana, as the lead, has such a distinct, entertaining personality, and Griffin is honestly one of my favorite leading men that I've read in years. What's your advice for crafting memorable romantic leads?
Well, taking it into consideration that, primarily we're typically writing female characters for female readers, and that's not 100% true. That's not across the board. I don't want to be, inclusive of anyone. There's lots of different room for different people in the genre. But just for me personally, that's what I'm normally doing, right? Is
Mhm.
my target audience are going to be primarily women. I make my heroines a little bit more flawed because it makes them more real and relatable, especially to another woman, that she's taking on too much, or stresses of things that you have in your own life that you're dealing with. And I think that is important, especially because I write first person point of view, that your reader has to be like, I get this woman. I understand what she's going through. I'm with her, And then for the heroes, I would say there is a fantasy aspect to my heroes that I don't make them as real and down to earth, to be honest, because I'm kind of selling a fantasy, right? Like we're selling this great guy who comes in and he's gonna, be amazing and do all these amazing things. And I appreciate when people make them more realistic too. Like I like all different kinds, but I'm really drawn to inherently good men that are cinnamon rolls. I don't care for alphas too much. I think I would like
Thank
stab
you.
this person in real life. Like there's no way. But I get that people like it. Like there's all kinds of stuff I love in fiction that I would never, like. I am a Raylo. Like give me Ben Solo and Ray. Like I love them. And like, but he's a fascist who kills people. I'm like, it's pretend. I love enemies to lovers, right? But would I date Kylo Ren in real life? Of course not. But yeah, there's a lot I'll tolerate in fiction, and I see what I'm drawn to and what I enjoy. But I think giving a little bit more of a man who is funny and witty and caring and kind and considerate, that you're writing this for an audience and that people respond to it. Like you're saying, Griffin's my favorite guy ever. And I'm like, well, yeah, because he's awesome, and he's all these things on a list that you would want. Because I think, pointing at that direction. How do I make him a little bit more Prince Charming rather than
Alpha
doofus?
douche.
Yes, right. Yeah. So yeah, that you do want to be not. And people have said he's just so perfect that it's hard to get into it. And I'm like, that's fair. That's a fair criticism, that I do lean that direction. And I tell people too, I'm like, but because I'm writing first person, you're getting it from the heroine's point of view. And in her mind, he is kind of perfect. That's why she's having a hard time resisting. And that's why she's falling in love with him. Not that these things don't exist, but you kind of have a little bit of an unreliable narrator going on here, right? Like she's falling in love. Sorry, she's just going to see all the good stuff. You have to think about what your readers are looking for and what you're looking for as an author. What are you interested in? And if you're like, I like really realistic men, I want him to be overweight, I want him to be, this and that, then write him, right? Like, and make it that way. And if you're like, I love the alpha bully, like I love that, that's my favorite thing, then write those, So just look for what appeals to you, and I think go in that direction with your characters.
What I found refreshing about Griffin was, and I hope this isn't a big spoiler, but when he's first introduced, it's kind of made out like he's this playboy, this like arrogant playboy. And then you get to know him and it's like, oh, that's actually not the case. For me, that was such a great trope subversion, because usually in these storylines where we have this hot royal guy, he is an arrogant playboy. And I was like, oh, this is so refreshing. He's just a sweetheart. Oh, thank you. Thank you, God. So I thought Diana and Griffin had fantastic chemistry in cinder-nanny. How do you build an organic connection between your characters rather than just throwing them together because you're supposed to?
That is another thing, that when I start writing, what is going to make these characters be attracted to each other? What are they going to see in the other one? Because otherwise, like you said, it's just so easy to go, well, you're the romance, main couple. Of course, you're going to fall in love. And it's easy to fall down that rabbit hole and get stuck in that, and not. And again, this comes back to having really good editors and having someone who says, but why do these characters like each other? Is it the wit? Is it the kindness? So I thought you almost have to put these moments in there where they're appreciating this thing about the other person, like they're being kind to a child, or they're taking care of an animal, or something like that, where you're like, oh, I get it, especially if they're opposites. If you're writing an opposites attract, there has to still be a commonality there. There has to be something where, like with Diana and Griffin, that their lives are so different, but that he sees in her this kindness and this, taking care of people, and that he's attracted to that. And that with her, same thing, like he's sacrificing everything for his brother and for his niece, and that she just finds that so amazing, because loyalty and family is so important to her. Of course she's going to appreciate that in someone else. So you're looking for those things of, what are the main attributes? And this is not to say that you have to write every character completely uniquely, that there's things that translate across the board, right? Like loyalty and kindness and intelligence and those kinds of things that, you can get away with having all your characters in the book be attracted to those things, because it's just such a universal kind of thing to like. The chemistry, to me, and like you said earlier, is the most important thing in romance for me, especially because I'm not writing love scenes. If you're not giving your readers chemistry, like, what are they here for?
Right.
Like, yeah, your characters are nice, your conflict's nice, but where's the romance? And that's actually one of the reasons I started writing romance. I grew up in a household of readers, and that my dad read mostly like Star Wars and fantasy books, and so I still love that stuff. But my mom would get Harlequins by the truckload. Like she belonged to that subscription thing. I'm not kidding. Like literally boxes of Harlequins would show up every month. When they moved, there must have been like tons of books. My mom keeps everything. So tons of books in the basement she had to donate and get rid of because she just had all these Harlequins downstairs. And I always kind of thought I was above that. Like I was in AP English in high school and I'm like, that's not classical literature. But I remember the day that I was desperate, I had nothing to read. And I grabbed my mom's Harlequins, and I remember it to this day. It was about two shipping magnates, Greek shipping magnates, and the guy was bad, and the heroine was this red-haired, daughter of his rival. And by the end, they fell in love. I remember feeling like, oh, they love each other. Oh my gosh. Like I was so happy and excited. That probably sounds so stupid, but I remember that feeling. And like I feel like I keep trying to recapture that feeling in my writing and in what I'm reading because it's just an amazing, phenomenal thing. And what I started noticing when I was reading fantasy was I was looking for the romance. And so much, especially when I was younger, so much of fantasy was written by men.
Yeah.
And it's like he's hot and she's hot and now they're in love. And I'm like, but what about the first time they touch hands? And what about when they look each other across the room? And where's all this good stuff? And what's happening here? And so I found myself gravitating towards romance because I wanted that chemistry. I wanted those moments of connection. And so I think that's what, if you're writing romance, that is what your readers are looking for. And if you leave that out, it is to your detriment. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that I read now is leaving it out. They're substituting hookups for the chemistry. And I'm like, but I don't want that. So, I bet there's people who love that. And that's great too, if that's what you prefer. But for me, I feel like you said, like it's the chemistry. It's her heart fluttering when he walks into a room. It's like the first time their hands touch and she kind of has to jerk away because it's just so overwhelming, the emotion she's getting. And yeah, I think that's really, really important.
I cannot agree more, and I could not have said it better myself. I have entire videos on this, so you just read my mind. So if you could give romance writers any advice, what would you say are the most important rules or tips they should follow?
The most important rule is that it ends happily ever after. And if you think you are subverting the genre by not finishing it that way, you are not correct. I mean, it seems so obvious, but I cannot believe the amount of discourse I see on this, like on a daily basis. It's really weird.
You are reading my mind. I've had people be like, "You're policing the genre." I'm like, it's literally the rule. It's just a genre rule. Just like fantasy has to have fantastical elements, or it's not a fantasy. It's like,
right.
It's just the rule.
Yeah. So that's the most important thing. So I would say, I always tell people to read. I am surprised at how many people want to write and they don't really read, and I'm like, well, reading's the most important thing. And then I think after you are doing a lot of reading, if you're already doing that, it's joining a professional organization or doing the professional work on your own. I did that a lot. I did both, but I read a lot of books about writing and I thought I had a pretty good handle on it before I started. I'm like, well, I read all the time. I know exactly what I'm doing. And then I started reading books about it and I'm like, oh no, there's things I'm missing, like that you can't head hop in a scene, that you shouldn't be doing that. And of course, there are exceptions to that rule. People do it, but by and large, it's not accepted and you shouldn't be doing it. It's not a good idea. But just things like that I didn't realize were things. And, people are like, well, I'm going to break this rule. You have to know what the rules are first for genre writing, and then you can break it, but understand what you're doing in the first place. So I think joining an organization that helps you with that, and there's so many different kinds out there, especially online now. There's so many different things you can join to learn, and most of that stuff is geared towards newbie writers. So it's well worth joining, I think, if you can find a writers group, especially if you can find one that's dedicated to romance. I think in other professional writing groups, a lot of times romance authors get drowned out and get overlooked and belittled, which infuriates me. So if you can find a romance-centric one, I think that is really, really helpful. Going to conferences, learning the craft before you try to start writing, and then writing, right? Like you have to practice anything to be good at it, and you have to keep working at it. And that's kind of how that's the advice that I think I would give.
It's funny that you mentioned people belittling romance writers, because when I hear that, I'm like, we're just laughing all the way to the bank. It's the most popular fiction genre. So belittle all you want, but we got the readers. So,
we keep the lights on at the publisher so you can write your literary fiction, so.
You're like my favorite person right now. Okay, so now that we're here at the end, can you tell everyone where they can follow you and check out your writing?
Yeah, probably the best place. I'm like on socials. I'm at Sariah Wilson on Twitter, at Sariah Wilson 411 on Instagram. On Facebook, I'm at Sariah Wilson author. Come there. I have a private group if you want to join and come talk to me, and I'm constantly in there posting stuff, and we'll give you tips and things if you want it. Otherwise I'll just post about the books I'm writing. But yeah, I'm around. My website is SARIAH'Wilson.com, and come join up for my newsletter if you're interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I had such a blast. It was such an honor to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome. I'm so glad. I have all of Sariah's links in the description below. Definitely check her out if you love fun and flirty contemporary romance or romantic comedies. Check out her books. You will not regret it. Cinder-Nanny, like I said, was one of my favorite reads this year. It is just chef's kiss amazing. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I post new videos on Wednesdays, and if you want to be alerted as soon as I upload, ring that bell. The Savior's Champion and The Savior's Sister are available in ebook, paperback, hardback, and audiobook. They're available at all major retailers, so if you like yourself some award-winning dark fantasy romance, definitely check them out. They're linked below. And be sure to follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, and BookBub, and of course, you can tweet me at Jenna Moreci. Bye!
Hey, this is Nick, the voice of Tobias and the narrator for The Savior's Champion, written by our Jenna. If you enjoy her writing advice, or if you want to find out about her publications, then you know what to do. Click the subscribe button, ding the bell, and you'll get notified every single time she puts up a video or she goes live. Now what are you waiting for?